The US is over $36 trillion in debt, and this figure is projected to increase by $2 trillion this year, and the number of buyers of this debt, well, it's decreasing. If this doesn't change, the US debt bubble could finally burst. Believe it or not, but stablecoins could be the solution. Stablecoin issuers have bought more than $60 billion of US debt in recent months, and the Trump administration is keen to grow this number. And that's why today we're going to explain exactly what the debt problem is, why stablecoins could be part of the solution, how they're going to grow, when this could happen, and which cryptos could benefit. My name is Nick, and you're watching the Coin Bureau. Let's start where we left off. We recently did a video about the Trump administration's plan to lower long-term interest rates. And if you watched that video, you'll know that they basically must implement this plan before the current debt ceiling is raised. And this de facto deadline is currently projected to be sometime in August. For context, the US government hit its debt ceiling in January this year. Hitting the debt ceiling means that the US government cannot issue any additional debt. The effects of this are a bit paradoxical. On the one hand, it means that the US government could run out of money and essentially stop functioning. On the other hand, though, the inability of the US government to issue more debt effectively amounts to stimulus, which is good for the markets. This is in part because less debt issuance means more money going into other assets, since there's less money moving out of other assets into newly issued bonds. For reference, bonds can be simply understood as IOUs that the US government sells to its investors. Once upon a time, they were literally physical IOUs, and they promised to pay the holder the value of the bond plus interest at some future date. Of course, bonds can be traded on secondary markets, and the interest rate, aka the yield on the bond, is determined by the price. Lower price means a higher yield, and of course, vice versa. Anyways, another part of why hitting the debt ceiling is stimulative is because the US government is forced to spend money from its bank account at the Federal Reserve, known as the Treasury General Account, or TGA for short. Since this was money that was sitting on the sidelines that is practically being injected back into the economy, it results in a net increase in liquidity overall, which is good for the markets. The catch is that when the debt ceiling gets raised, they will need to refill the TGA. Assuming the TGA is close to empty when this happens, then it will result in a massive liquidity drain because the US government will need to issue roughly $800 billion of new debt in a very short period of time. Notably, most of the debt used to refill the TGA would be purchased by commercial banks in the US, and this would reduce the amount of money they have on hand for their day-to-day operations, potentially risking a banking crisis. And this is why the Fed recently announced it would significantly be reducing its QT. For those unfamiliar, QT stands for quantitative tightening, and it's when the Fed reduces the size of its balance sheet. Contrary to popular belief, this does not include selling bonds. Rather, it involves buying gradually fewer bonds as older bonds mature, i.e. get fully paid back. As such, the practical effect of QT is that the Fed buys gradually fewer bonds, which means other buyers must step in to fill the gap. And as we just learned, these other buyers would mostly be commercial banks, and if there's lots of bonds being issued, then their cash reserves could be drained to a level that threatens financial stability. As such, the Fed made the decision to reduce QT to next to zero, and the practical effect of this is that the Fed is buying gradually more US bonds than it was before, which has a stimulative effect on the market. And by the way, guys, this is very important. If you're enjoying this video so far, then let us know by smashing that like button. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, you can do that right now by hitting the subscribe. And you may as well want to hit the bell as well to make absolutely sure you don't miss our upcoming videos. So, to quickly recap, the US debt ceiling needs to be raised by sometime in August. Otherwise, the US government could default on its debts. Between now and then, it needs to find buyers for the $800 billion of bonds it will need to issue to refill the TGA. Obviously, this is something that the Fed could do, but if it did, it would destroy the credibility of US bonds as assets and the US dollar as a currency. Usually banks would buy these bonds, but they don't have enough cash on hand to buy them all without risking a banking crisis. And the last time the debt ceiling was raised in 2023, investors who had money in the Fed's overnight reverse repo facility bought most of the bonds issued to refill the TGA. And FYI, the overnight reverse repo facility, or RRP for short, is just a place where other TradFi investors can keep money at the Fed. As some of you will know, the RRP has mostly been drained, meaning it can't come to the rescue this time either. If that wasn't bad enough, foreign investors have also been reducing their purchases of US bonds. With fewer domestic and foreign buyers, it's hard to see how the Trump administration will be able to issue $800 billion of bonds without disrupting the markets come August. But as noted in the introduction, stablecoins could be the solution. Now, for those unfamiliar, stablecoins are crypto tokens that are pegged to fiat currencies, mostly the US dollar. And what's interesting about stablecoins is that they're backed by US bonds, much like money market funds. The difference is that money market funds share some of the bond yields with investors, whereas stablecoins do not. Anyhow, the key takeaway is that stablecoins are backed by US bonds, and this means that when someone buys a stablecoin, the issuer of the stablecoin needs to buy an equivalent amount of US bonds to back the stablecoin token. As I noted also in the introduction, stablecoin issuers have purchased more than $60 billion of US bonds over the last year or so, mostly USDT issuer Tether and USDC issuer Circle. To put things into perspective, Tether alone was the 7th largest buyer of US bonds globally in 2024, putting it on par with the United Kingdom. And this begs the question of why stablecoins are growing so much. And the answer depends on the stablecoin, because each stablecoin has its own use case. In USDT's case, it's primarily used for crypto trading, especially altcoin trading and leveraged trading. The more people that want to speculate on altcoins or trade crypto with leverage, the greater the demand for USDT and the more bonds that Tether needs to buy to back these stablecoins. The caveat is that USDT isn't just backed by US bonds, it's backed by other assets too, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. Now, in USDC's case, it's used primarily in DeFi, especially in borrowing and lending. And if you watched our video about how the crypto market works, you'll know that the crypto whales will often use their BTC and ETH holdings as collateral to borrow stablecoins, usually USDC. In turn, this USDC gets invested into altcoins, which eventually drives more altcoin trading and leverage on exchanges. So, more USDT demand. On that note, what's fascinating is that Trump's meme coin was launched on Solana, with USDC as the primary trading pair. And this meant that everyone who wanted to buy the Trump meme coin first had to buy USDC, either directly or indirectly via some other crypto like Sol. The result was that the supply of USDC on Solana exploded by $2 billion in a matter of days, with billions of US bonds bought to back it. It's not just altcoin speculation and DeFi degeneracy driving demand for stablecoins either. In case you missed the news, PayPal, the world's largest payment processor, is aiming to get 20 million merchants to use its PYUSD stablecoin by the end of the year. Bank of America is also planning on launching a stablecoin, and Fidelity is on the brink of doing the same. Both are just waiting for regulatory clarity. When you realize that there are over 200 stablecoins and counting, and that some are likely to grow exponentially when there's regulatory clarity, you start to understand that stablecoins could in fact be used to raise hundreds of billions of dollars required to refill the TGA before the debt ceiling gets raised sometime over the summer. The craziest part is that this could all theoretically happen on time.
It's the place to be when you're in need of amazing crypto deals and opportunities. It's got savings that you won't believe, like money off those pesky trading fees. It's the Coin Bureau deals page. Sign up bonuses and discounts too. The Coin Bureau deals page. We put these deals together just for you, just for you.
And this begs a bigger question, and that's how much US bonds stablecoins need to buy for the TGA to be refilled without disrupting the market. And we can use the TGA drawdown and refill to get the answer. To refresh your memory, the last time the debt ceiling was hit was in January 2023. It was raised at the last minute in June 2023, and the TGA then quickly refilled between June and October over 4 to 5 months. As a fun little fact, the reason why August is the deadline for the debt ceiling to be raised at this time has mostly to do with the fact that 2024 was a big tax year, mostly because the markets were up bigly in 2024. And this means that the TGA will be partially refilled in April due to the tax season, just like it was in April 2023. The difference is that the 2023 refill was small, mostly because the markets were down badly in 2022. In any case, this is where the macro gets truly intriguing. You'll recall that the RRP was used to refill the TGA after the debt ceiling was last raised in 2023, and you'll hopefully recall that the TGA refill occurred between June and October 2023. As you can see, the RRP facility fell by roughly $1.2 trillion during this period. At first glance, this seems a bit excessive because the TGA refill was only $800 billion. But upon closer inspection, you realize that most of the remaining $400 billion that went out of the RRP facility went towards buying the bonds the Fed was no longer buying due to QT. As you can see, the Fed's balance sheet fell by roughly $400 billion between June and October 2023. It's a match. In case you forgot, the Fed isn't really running down its balance sheet this time. To all intents and purposes, QT has ended. And this means that $800 billion is all the US government will need to refill the TGA. Although this capital is likely to come from multiple sources, it looks like stablecoin issuers could be the big buyers. While it's not possible to know how big stablecoins could grow, it's possible to estimate. At the start of the previous crypto bull market, the total market cap of the largest stablecoins was roughly $7 billion. By the end of the bull market, the total market cap had grown to over $140 billion, over $160 billion if you include Terra's UST stablecoin. And some measures put this figure as high as $180 billion, but let's call it $140 billion to be conservative. That's 20x growth in supply. If we assume diminishing returns in stablecoin growth akin to what we see in large-cap cryptos like Bitcoin, then the total supply of stablecoins could grow by about 10 times. And this sounds insane until you examine each major stablecoin individually. Starting with USDT, you'll remember it is primarily used in crypto trading. And if you watched our recent video about retail investors, you'll know that the total number of crypto investors could as much as triple this cycle. Assuming most of these crypto investors use USDT to buy, sell, or trade, then this means that USDT's supply could triple from its starting point of 100 billion, bringing its supply close to 300 billion. Next, we have USDC, which you'll remember is used primarily in DeFi. According to DeFi Llama, the total value locked in DeFi rose by 10 times in the previous cycle, while USDC's supply simultaneously grew by 20 times. With the President of the United States literally launching his own DeFi protocol, the chances are that the total value locked in DeFi will rise considerably this cycle. Not 10 times, but perhaps closer to 3 to 5 times. Given that USDC's supply seems to grow twice as much as the overall DeFi TVL, this foreshadows a 6 to 10 times increase in USDC's supply. With a starting point of around 40 billion, this would translate to a USDC supply between 240 to 400 billion by the end of the crypto bull market. And this isn't that far-fetched when you consider that USDC is increasingly being used for trading and payments in select jurisdictions. Speaking of which, PayPal's PYUSD stablecoin is the real wild card from our perspective. Consider that PayPal processed almost $1.7 trillion in payments last year, and now remember that it wants 20 million merchants using PYUSD by the end of the year. If just 5 to 10% of PayPal's payments were made using stablecoins, it would translate to tens or hundreds of billions of dollars being minted. When you combine these three stablecoins with the coins being launched by mega banks like Bank of America, asset managers like Fidelity, and other large players in the crypto industry like Ripple, you get a number that's surprisingly close to the $800 billion cash pile required to refill the TGA. All that's missing is sensible stablecoin regulations, which are, of course, working their way through Congress as you watch this video. To bring you up to speed, there are not one, but two stablecoin bills going through Congress, one in the Senate and one in the House. Both are still in the early stages, though. The stablecoin bill in the Senate is called the Genius Act, and it was recently approved by the Senate Banking Committee. The next step is for the bill to be voted on by the Senate as a whole. If approved by the Senate, it will go to the House. And if it's approved by the House, it will go to the President to be signed into law. Meanwhile, the stablecoin bill in the House is called the Stable Act, and it was recently introduced to the House Financial Services Committee. The next step is for it to be voted on by the committee, and if approved, it will be voted on by the House as a whole. If approved by the House, it will go to the Senate, and if it's approved by the Senate, then it will go to the President to, again, be signed into law. The Genius Act is arguably the more superior bill of the two, at least as far as refilling the TGA goes. And that's because it has fewer restrictions compared with the Stable Act. For example, the Genius Act allows for experimentation with decentralized stablecoins, whereas the Stable Act calls for a 2-year ban on decentralized stablecoins. The thing is that most decentralized stablecoins are also backed by US bonds. It goes without saying that this doesn't make them very decentralized, but let's not get into that debate. Anywho, it's not entirely clear how these two stablecoin bills will interact. Earlier reports noted that both would be passed, but it's clear that they're going to be incompatible on key points. And this could set the stage for lots of debate between both houses of Congress as they wrestle over which stablecoin bill to approve. It's also possible that they could opt to combine them, but this remains to be seen. One of these bills is expected to be approved by August, but it looks like this could happen much sooner. And that's because these bills are being passed independently of any larger bills, and because there's a pro-crypto supermajority in both houses of Congress. And this means that there won't be any issues passing one of these stablecoin bills. But as I just noted, there could be tensions over which stablecoin bill will win. For what it's worth, the goal is to have stablecoin regulations passed within Trump's first 100 days in office, and that's April 29th for anyone counting. And if stablecoin regulations were to pass by this deadline or around that time, there would be 4 months for the powers that be to grow the stablecoin supply as big as possible. And this may not be enough time to get the cash required to refill the TGA, but it could be close enough. And this brings me to the big question, and that's which cryptos could benefit from the upcoming stablecoin frenzy. Finding the answer is surprisingly straightforward. All we need to do is look at the blockchains that the biggest stablecoins are on, and the blockchains where current and existing stablecoins are growing the most. This information can be found on websites of the issuers of these stablecoins. In the case of USDT, the most popular blockchains are Ethereum, Tron, and Solana. However, USDT appears to be growing the fastest on Toncoin, Aptos, and soon on Ethereum's Layer 2s with the recent launch of USDT0 and Optimism Superchain Collective, which consists of multiple Layer 2s that leverage Optimism's tech. In the case of USDC, the most popular blockchains are Ethereum and Solana, with Base and Arbitrum tied for third. As another fun fact, the main reason why there's so much USDC on Arbitrum is because that's how USDC is bridged into Hyperliquid, which we recently reviewed. The TLDR is that Hyperliquid is a derivatives DEX that's been growing in popularity, and this has created significant demand for USDC. It should come as no surprise then that USDC seems to be growing the most on Hyperliquid, as well as Solana, Sui, Aptos, Berachain, and Sonic, which we also recently reviewed. It looks like Circle is focusing on deploying USDC to newer chains that are experiencing the most growth, which is a very sound strategy. In the case of PYUSD, its most popular blockchains are Ethereum and Solana, and PayPal has been explicit in its intentions to use Solana as the primary payment rails for its stablecoin. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention Ripple's RLUSD stablecoin, which exists mostly on Ethereum and XRP. And if you've been keeping up with our XRP updates, you'll know that XRP is in the process of launching an EVM-compatible sidechain. It's expected that this sidechain will eventually host most of the RLUSD in circulation. And this makes sense as it will be more programmable and interoperable with the rest of crypto. From our perspective, the growth of RLUSD and its impact on XRP, its ecosystem, and the broader crypto market is one of the most underpriced factors in crypto right now. XRP has a market cap well over $100 billion, with millions of holders who would prefer to borrow against their XRP rather than to sell it. The result could be tens of billions of stablecoins being minted using XRP as collateral. And this would be a massive injection of crypto-native liquidity that would seamlessly flow throughout the crypto ecosystem, particularly on other EVM chains like Ethereum, thanks to XRP's EVM sidechain. Not shilling XRP here, just pointing out that this is a massive bullish factor that everyone seems to be overlooking. And that reminds me, it's easy to forget that it won't just be layer 1 cryptos that benefit from the increase in stablecoin supply and activity. The altcoins on these layer 1s will benefit as well due to the overall increase in on-chain liquidity, as well as the increase in value of the native crypto of that layer 1. This is exactly what we've seen historically with most major smart contract cryptos like Solana and Ethereum. When ETH or Sol pumped, altcoins on Ethereum and Solana would also pump. And this would attract more altcoin speculation, which I'll remind you is what the Trump administration wants. The more crypto speculation there is, the more demand there will be for stablecoins. And of course, the more US bonds get bought. It's almost as if that was the plan all along. All that's left to figure out now is which crypto niches and narratives will perform the best. And you can check out our recent video about that right over here. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, you can do that right over here. This is Nick signing off. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again soon.